The story we are told as young Catholics or Baptist American children is that Christianity is a unique religion that came out of nowhere in the first century, based on the parables and teachings of a man named Jesus of Nazareth, against all odds, under extreme persecution by the Roman Empire, but still prevailed and became the state religion of all of the West. Sounds like a miracle, but is this really the case? My answer is no. Before I explain why, let's break down this claim into three major key parts. Number one, Christianity is unique. Number two, Christianity comes from Jesus' parables. And number three, against all odds, under extreme persecution, Christianity prevailed against an empire. To start with Christianity as being unique. All religions are a product of an evolution of ideas. Religions are formed upon the same process as any other cultural aspect of civilization. Art, music, poetry, film, philosophy, mythology, different aspects of culture. They all have influences and they all influence others. In the case of Christianity, I think there is nothing special or irregular about it. It fits in perfectly where it stands. Philo of Judaeus is writing in the 30s and 40s about a divine logos who is going to inherit the kingdom of heaven from God the Father and will be the judge of the dead. Philo frequently engages in Pythagorean-inspired numerology, explaining at length the importance of religious numbers, such as 7 or 10 or 12, something we see in the New Testament, such as the B666 or the splitting of loaves and fishes. Philo is a Middle Platonist. Philo represents the apex of Jewish Hellenistic syncretism. His work attempts to combine Plato and Moses into one philosophical system. His ethics were strongly influenced by Pythagoreanism, Stoicism, preferring morality of virtues without passions, such as lust, desire, and anger, but with a common human sympathy. Philo compares Moses to Plato and even calls Plato a Hellenistic Moses. This tells us that there are educated, famous Jewish authors who are influenced and open to Middle Platonism. Middle Platonism is all the rage for the time period. In the century prior, we have writers like Jesus ben Sirach, another Hellenistic Jewish scribe, sage, allegorist from the Seleucid-controlled Jerusalem time period, Second Temple period. He is the author of a book called Sirach, or known as the Book of Ecclesiasticus. He talks about the coming of the Messiah. We also have Hillel the Elder, a famous Jewish sage who is known for two sayings. Number one, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? And being only for myself, what am I? If not now, when? And number two, the expression of ethic reciprocity, the golden rule, that which is hateful to you, do not do unto your fellow. That is the whole Torah. The rest is commentary. Now go and learn this rule. Love your fellow as you love yourself. So even going back to the 2nd century B.C.E., people like Aristobulus of Alexandria, another Hellenistic Jewish philosopher of the Peripatetic school. The Peripatetic school was a school of philosophy in ancient Greece. Its teachings derived from its founder Aristotle. Aristobulus, who is most likely to be a huge influence on people like Philo and possibly Hillel, also used Platonic Pythagorean concepts through the lens of Judaism. Like his successor Philo, he attempted to use Hebrew scriptures with those in Greek thought, endeavored to prove that early Greek philosophers from Linus, Orpheus, Eusebius, and others strongly resemble the Mosaic writers. And And finally, a few decades before Aristobulus, we get the translation of the Hebrew text into Greek by the Ptolemaic Empire. This is what starts Hellenized Judaism, because now people who speak Greek can read the Bible. So, with that being said, we can clearly see a slow evolution from the creating of the Greek Septuagint through the eras of Middle Platonism, Hellenized Jews, up to the time of Jesus. This was a time period that was ripe with messianism, people like Judas of Galilee, Simon of Perea, but also we are in a time of mystery cults, Orphic Judaism, Zoroastrian Greeks, and the worship of healer gods like Serapis in Egypt or Eshmun in Phoenicia, whose name is a pun on oil and the eighth son of Baal, a god who dies from castration and is raised into heaven by Astarte and brought back to earth as a healer god, similar to Attis, whose suffering and death caused weeping and set an example. His Day of Blood, celebrated around the spring equinox for a 3-day period from March 24th to the 27th. Dionysus, who was once Zagreus, born from the heavenly Persephone, dies a violent death, is raised up into heaven, where he would wait for his second coming under a new earthly mother, Semele, where he got back in his glory, demanding repentance and worship. The Son of God Savior, or Soter movements are plentiful. Initiation rites into Mithraism, or the Eleusinian mysteries, is life or death for worshippers. Salvation is what people are seeking in afterlife. To go back to our list, for number 1, is Christianity unique? Not at all. What about number 2? Does it come from Jesus' parables alone? I already mentioned that these Hellenized Jews are handing down ideas such as the Golden Rule. Treat people how you want to be treated. The whole Torah is to love your neighbor. The Logos is the Son of God who will inherit the kingdom of heaven. But to be fair, I think it's safe to say that whoever Jesus was may have contributed some of his own ideas into this evolutionary path of theology. There's just no way of knowing how much was his original ideas and how much wasn't, especially when we know that some of these ideas predate him. Justin Martyr once said, "And when we say also that the Logos, who is the first birth of God, was produced without sexual union, and that he, Jesus Christ, our teacher, was crucified and died and rose again and ascended into heaven, we propound nothing different from what you believe regarding those who you esteem sons of Jupiter. For you know how many sons your esteemed writers ascribe to Jupiter. Mercury, the interpreting Logos and teacher of all. Asclepius, who, though he was a great physician, was struck by a thunderbolt, and so ascended to heaven. And Bacchus, too, after he had been torn limb from limb. Hercules, when he had committed himself to the flames to escape his toils. And the sons of Leda, Dioscuri, Perseus, son of Danae, and Bellerophon, who, though sprung from mortals, rose to heaven on the horse Pegasus. For what shall I say? Ariadne, and those who, like her, have been declared to be set among the stars. And what of the emperors who die among yourselves, whom you deem worthy of deification, and whose behalf you produce someone who swears he has been seen the burning Caesar rise to heaven from the funeral pyre? And what kind of deeds are recorded of each of these reputed sons of Jupiter? It is needless to tell to those who already know. This only should be said. They are written for the advantage and the encouragement of youthful scholars, for all reckon it honorable thing to imitate the gods. But far be such a thought concerning the gods from well-conditioned soul, as to believe that Jupiter himself, the governor and creator of all things, was both a parricide and the son of a parricide, and that being overcome by the love of base and shameful pleasures, he came into Ganymede, and those many women who he had violated, and that his sons did like actions. But as we have said above, wicked devils perpetrated these things, and we have learned that those who are only deified have lived near to God in holiness and virtue, and we believe that those who live wickedly and do not repent are punished in everlasting fire. Interesting that he mentions Caesar, because we have Philo talking about Caesar, Augustus, who calmed the storms that were raging in every direction, who brought peace to the world, and Suetonius has the passage of there being a star in the sky to signify the birth of a king of the world. Many miracles that are attributed to Caesar Augustus as well, who avenges his father, Julius, through adoption from the grave. So some of these ideas are in the air. But that's just a side note compared to what he's actually saying before that. That the sons of Jupiter, especially being Asclepius and Mercury, who is the Logos, representations of a similar idea, that of Jesus. That he's saying we have nothing different in our Logos, in our Son of God, that you have in your Logos and your Son of God. Except the only difference is demons created yours to confuse us, where ours is the real one. Let that sink in. The Carpocratians were an early Christian sect in Alexandria, who were the first to have images or statues of Jesus. But also, next to Jesus, they venerated statues of Plato and Pythagoras. The Simonians, another early Christian sect, thought that Simon Magus, Jesus, and Helena were human incarnations of Zeus, Athena, and Saturn. The Nacenes, another early Christian sect, had a hymn to Attis, but it was repurposed for Jesus, and it went something like this. Blessed one, whether born of Cronos, Zeus, or Rhea, I loudly hail thee, Jesus. You the Assyrians call thrice-desired Adonis. All Egypt calls you Osiris. Samothracians call you Adamas. The Phrygians Pappus, a corpse, a god, unfruitful, goatherd, green ear of harvested grain, player of the pipes, Orpheus. And even though these early Christians who predate the Nicene Creed are later considered heretics, we still have Eusebius in the 4th century in his famous work titled On the Preparation for the Gospel, in which he goes over primitive theology of the Phoenicians and Egyptians, matters regarding Osiris and Eshmun. Eusebius quotes Neoplatonist writer Porphyry, stating that Sancho Nieton of Beirut wrote the truest history because he obtained records from Hieromobulus, the priest of Huo, that Sancho Nieton dedicated the history of Abibal, king of Beirut, and that it was approved by the king and other investigators, the date of this writing being before the Trojan War, 13th century BC, approaching close to the time of Moses, when Semiramis was queen of the Assyrians. Thus, Sancho Nieton is placed firmly in the mythic context of the pre-Homeric Greek heroic age, an antiquity from which no other Greek or Phoenician writers are known to have survived to the time of Philo. The idea that Saturn, known to the Phoenicians as Israel, offered up his only begotten son as an atonement for sins. Eusebius says that this is the myth of all the ages. Eusebius also makes the claim that the ancient Greeks like Plato, Orpheus, Pythagoras had wisdom that aligned with Moses, Jesus, and Elijah. So, with number 1 and number 2 safely crossed out through demonstration, let's go on to the next one. Did this religion prevail against and an empire against all odds? And again, I think not. Let's take a look at a passage from a famous book called The Republic by Plato. As we see here in Book 3. Concerning the gods then, this sort of thing that we must allow or not allow them to hear from childhood up. See, Plato's talking about what myths are good for people to learn, what myths are not good for people to learn. He is looking for a theology, for a republic, for a state religion. He says, if they are to honor the gods and their fathers and mothers, and to hold their friendship with one another in light esteem, that is our view, and I believe it right. What then of this? If they are to be brave, must we not extend our prescription to include the sayings that will make them least likely to fear death? Or do you suppose that anyone can ever become brave who had that dread in his heart? No, indeed, I do not, he replied. And again, he who believes in the reality of the underworld and its terrors, do you think that any man will be fearless of death in battle and prefer death to defeat and slavery? By no means. Then it seems we must exercise supervision in the matter of such tales over those who undertake to simply them and request them, not to dispraise in this undiscriminating fashion the life of Hades, but rather praise it, since what they now tell us is neither true nor edifying to men who are destined to be warriors. Yes, we must, he said. Then, beginning with this verse, we will expunge everything of the same kind. Plato, for the next few paragraphs, goes over Homer, Iliad and Odyssey, Aeschylus fragments, and other myths from the time period. And what Plato wants to do is replace these myths with a new and more imperfect myth. He says here that we must further taboo in these matters an entire vocabulary of terror and fear, named of lamentation, loud, abhorred, Styx, the flood of deadly hate, the people of the infernal pit, and the charnel house, and all other terms of this type, whose very names send a shudder through all the hearers every year. And they may be excellent for other purposes, but we are in fear for our guardians lest the habit of such thrills make them more sensitive and soft, and we would have them. And we are right in so fearing. We must remove those things then. The opposite type to them is what we must require in speech and verse. And shall we also do away with wailings and lamentations of men repute? Whether we shall be right in thus getting rid of them or not, we affirm is that a good man will not think for that good man whose friend is death a terrible thing. Here it is again, mentioning the fear of death for good men should not exist. Good men should not fear death. Wicked men should fear death. Something that we see in Judeo-Christian thought. What we affirm is that a good man will not think that for a good man whose friend is also death a terrible thing. Then it would not be for his friend's sake, as he had suffered something dreadful, that he would make lament. But we also say this, that such one is as most men is beneficent unto himself. For a good life, and distinguished from other men, and having least need of anybody else, least of all of them is a terrible thing to lose a son, or a brother, or wealth, or anything of the sort. Then he makes least lament and bears it most moderately when any such misfortune takes him over. We should be right, that we shall request Homer and the other poets not to portray Achilles, the son of a goddess, lying now on his side and then again on his back, and then rising up, distraught, on the shore of the waste unharvested ocean, clutching both hands in sooty dust and strewing over his head, weeping and lamenting in the manner attributed to him by the poet. What Plato is saying is that it's not good to depict gods having flaws or crying. Gods are perfect. Gods don't cry for other men. See, the Platonism is a replacement for the ancient Homeric mythology. And this is not a surprise to me that something like this would fit well with the Judeo monotheistic worldview. See, then he says later on, he talks about the noble lie, that sometimes it's good for the state or the priestly class to lie. But further, we must surely prize truth most highly, for we were right, and what we were just saying in falsehood is in very deed useless to gods, but to men useful as a remedy or form of medicine. It is obvious that such a thing must be assigned to the physicians, and laymen should have nothing to do with it. The rulers then of the city may, if anybody, lie on the account of enemies or citizens or for the benefit of the state. Nor others may have anything to do with lying, but a layman to lie to rulers of that kind is the greatest sin. That's kind of mind-blowing. Plato's kind of a crappy dude, if you ask me. I mean, that's just like straight up fascist right there. As we saw there in Book 3, Plato, who's arguably the greatest influence on theology in the world leading up to the time of Christianity, has established that he thinks Homer should be replaced with a new and more sound doctrine, the doctrine of the Logos. He also wants to make a faith that's based on not fearing death and the ability for a priestly class to lie if they have to. I would be lying if I said that Christians face zero persecution. They certainly did face rough persecutions under Domitian, Nero, Diocletian. But they also had some great elite donors in the system of bishops throughout the empire. They had Trajan leave them alone when asked by Pliny the Younger if they are illegal or not. Marcus Aurelius seems to put them in the conversation with the Stoics and Epicureans. Emperors who came out of the East, like Heliogabalus, included their sacred rites into the Roman imperial cult, and Philip the Arab is said to have possibly converted, or at very least gave confession and took part in the rites. By the time of Constantine, Christianity has elite patrons like Helena and a deep and well-connected church system in major cities throughout the empire. The growth is slow and normal. We can see from Christ Associations by John Kloppenborg that these Christian families are burying their dead in Roman catacombs with other Romans. When Constantine converts, this is already in the top two religious movements along with Sol Invictus worship. These two religions are especially popular among legions, but Christianity offers something that no other religion could offer: equality. No matter how rich, no matter how poor, woman or male, slave or king, Jew or Gentile, salvation is for anyone who believes in the resurrection. The same idea that Plato would replace Homer with. The idea that good citizens no longer need to fear death, and that they could know that their family would be saved too, but the wicked would perish. The triumphant nature of the Christian salvation is what made this religion win in the end. Now, with all that being said, 1, 2, and 3 on this list. Christianity is not unique. It doesn't come just from the parables of Jesus. And it didn't, against all odds, against extreme persecution, prevail against an empire either. But that doesn't mean that there was a conspiracy, as people who are proponents of Roman providence theory would have you believe. That doesn't mean that there is a secret government program to create Christianity and make it the state religion. That is just not the case. There's no need for that. As I demonstrated in the evolution of ideas from the time of the Septuagint, through Aristobulus, through Philo, through these early Christians and people like Hillel the Elder, there is no need for a secret religion to replace zealot theology. In fact, I don't know of any zealot theology that ever prevailed at all. To me, that's just a fringe group that came and left with the Jewish War. And I don't see any reason for establishing a polemic for that. These ideas are normal, and they fit in with the evolution of theology throughout the ages. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. What do you guys think about all this? Do you think that Christianity is unique? Do you think it comes from Jesus' parables? What about Paul? Do you think Christianity faced extreme persecution and prevailed against an empire against all odds? Let me know what you think in the comments. And you have attained true gnosis.